Here are more examples on gene-environment interaction. Okay, this is another manifestation of gene-environment interaction. Smoking during pregnancy can lead to all these detrimental outcomes. It can increase the fetus heart rate, and smoking during pregnancy can also reduce the oxygen to the fetus, and this reduction in oxygen to the fetus can lead to premature birth, miscarriages, or low birth weights. However, low birth weight, miscarriage, and premature birth are also determined by the neighborhood characteristics of the mother. If the neighborhood the mother lives in has no transportation or minimal transportation system, and because of that, the mother cannot get access to healthcare facilities for prenatal, postnatal, and other checkups. These can also lead to detrimental outcomes like low birth weights, miscarriages, and premature birth. Or if the neighborhood is high crime, high unemployment, it's a high poverty neighborhood, and people living there may feel unsafe to even take the existing public transportation to go for prenatal care, or to use the healthcare facilities, or to go get access to healthy food. And these can also lead to all these adverse outcomes like low birth weight, miscarriages, and premature birth. And as we've been through this before, where we live are determined by our education, income, and the nature of our job, whether the job provides insurance or not, whether the job is permanent or temporary or contract. And our education, income, and occupation or other opportunities afforded to us affects where we are going to live, and this in turn affects who we are going to mingle with. And sometimes we may mingle with those living in our neighborhoods, and they may be a source of support system with respects to information pertaining to prenatal care, postnatal care, and other types of preventive services. And sometimes neighbors may also provide assistance in terms of transportation and whatnot, so that maybe the pregnant mother can go somewhere to receive care. So because of that, maternal smoking is definitely a manifestation of gene-environment interaction. And we know that the risk for PKU varies from person to person, and this PKU is another manifestation of gene-environment interaction. The person has to have the PKU genotype, and this gene is going to interact with the person's diet, and different people have different types of diet. Some diets are high in phenylalanine, and some diets are low in phenylalanine, and this in turn is going to affect the person's ability to break down amino acid or to avoid metabolism defect, and this ultimately determine the person's risk for PKU. And if you Google the word phenylalanine, is a kind of amino acid, found in fruits, vegetables, low protein bread and pasta, and whether a person can have access to diet low in phenylalanine depends on the type of neighborhood the person lives in. And because of that, this is another example of gene-environment interaction. And we know that maternal PKU can lead to all kinds of outcomes on the infant who later transition into children and teenagers and adults. Maternal PKU can lead to delayed development, and maternal PKU can also affect the risk for intellectual disability or the risk for low birth weights. And maternal PKU can also increase the risk for heart problems and other behavioral problems. And we know the neighborhood the pregnant mother lives in determines the diet of the mother, whether the mother can have access to low phenylalanine diet or the mother has no choice but to resort quote-unquote to high phenylalanine diet. So this is another example of gene-environment interaction. And we know low level of monoamine oxidase A or MAOA allele can increase a person's risk for antisocial behavior or can lead to aggressive behavior. And the changes or the level of MAOA allele depends on a person's neighborhood, whether the neighborhood is violent, high crime, or a person's upbringing, family upbringing, whether the person experience or observe aggression among his or her parents or siblings growing up. And because of that, a person's neighborhood or family upbringing can quote-unquote endorse aggressive behaviors or make the person think that it's okay to solve problems through aggression. The same thing for the person's peer group. If the person mingle with peers who quote-unquote confirms or endorse aggressive or violent behavior, this can affect the allele or the MAOA allele in that individual, and this can increase the person's risk for either antisocial behavior or aggressive behavior. So this is another manifestation of gene-environment interaction. In this case, a person's peer group, a person's residential area, a person's family upbringing can change the level of a person's MAOA allele, and this can lead to all kinds of behavioral outcomes. This research talks about how disadvantaged neighborhoods is positively correlated with dopamine risk alleles, and violent crime rates in a given neighborhood are also correlated with dopamine risk alleles. And we all know it's a no-brainer that people, even if they are exposed to equal amounts of stress in a given place, not everybody is going to abuse substance or develop substance dependence. Stress experienced by that person in a given neighborhood has to interact with the kind of MAOA allele within the person system. If the person is exposed to a lot of stress and so happen the person also have low MAOA allele, this can increase the person's chances of abusing all kinds of substance or being dependent on substance. So this is another example of gene-environment interaction. And we know that Ritalin can be used to treat ADHD and other medical conditions. But Ritalin may also increase the level of dopamine in a person, and this can in turn affects the person's movement, libido, motivation, or mood and emotion regulation. And awareness about the potential of all these effects depends on a person's education, income, occupation, and the person's residential area. And living in a certain kinds of neighborhood may make it harder or easier for people in that neighborhood to use or abuse cocaine and other drugs. This is going to increase the dopamine level in the person who uses cocaine. And this is going to go through something like a cycle. And this is how addiction problem happens. And diet that contains nuts, cheese, or red meat can affect our serotonin level in our system, and this in turn affects our bone health, mental health, appetite, sleep quality, and libido. And a person's education, occupation, income determines whether that person is going to be aware of the benefits of nuts consumption, cheese consumption, and red meat consumption. Okay, I'm sure you observed this before. People may live in the same neighborhood. A bunch of people may live in the same neighborhood, but they don't all develop mood or emotional problems or other mental health issues. And they have different abilities to control their emotions and to handle stress. And people living within the same neighborhood, they may have different levels of appetite, and their sleep patterns or quality may differ. And why is that the case? So, the type of neighborhood we live in or our home environment interacts with the type of 5 HTT genes we have in our system. Whether we have 2 short alleles or SS, or 1 short and 1 long allele, or the SL allele, or we have 2 long alleles. This in turn can affect the functioning of our selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors or SSRI, and this in turn affects the level of serotonin in our brain. And we know that serotonin is a feel-good hormone, and this ultimately affects our risk for developing mood problems, mood disorder, or other mental health issues. This ultimately affects our abilities to control emotions or to handle stress. And this ultimately determines how our appetite is going to work. And this ultimately affect our sleep quality. So this explain why people who live in a particular neighborhood, they don't all have the same mood disorder problems. They have different abilities to control emotions and stress. They have different appetite and they have different sleep patterns. This is because the neighborhood or home environment has to interact with the type of 5-HTT they have in their system to affect how the SSRI is going to function in them. And we know if a person has too short alleles, 2SS, in their system, they are more prone to stress. They are less adaptive to stress. A person with one short and one long allele, they have moderate abilities to handle stress. And if the person has two long alleles, the person has high adaptability to stress. And we know that this 5-HTT can be inherited from the parents' generation.